As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another Sleeping with the Numbers podcast. Dylan and Pat here, and today we're talking running backs for the fantasy football season. Running back, probably my favorite offensive position, at least. I also like linebackers, but running back is what I played whenever I played football. I was a small little dude, so I always like seeing guys like who was the guy out of Philadelphia for all those years? Little guy. It's like 5'6".
Aaron Sproles.
Darren Sproles. That's my kind of running back. Just these little dudes that can get the job done. Devin Singletary is another one. So, I always respect those types of guys. So let's kick it off here. So Pat, we're coming up on fantasy season. There's no time too early to start doing some mock drafting. So let's talk about your kind of favorite strategy. I know you shouldn't stick to a strategy. Whenever the draft actually goes on, you should more so play it by ear. But when you're mocking, maybe you can play these strategies. So for the first two rounds, I really do tend to go running back. And there's a couple reasons for that. The biggest reason for me is in terms of what you get in tiers of running backs run out a lot quicker than wide receivers do. So, you may be very scarce on running back after just 3 or 4 rounds, where you can still find some solid wide receivers later in the draft. So I like to get the top tier guys early if I can, especially if I'm like towards the beginning of the draft. So like maybe rounds or spots 1 through 8 or so. That's where I'm really like, okay, I know I can get a solid running back that I'm going to be happy with, start them every week, never have to worry about it. Whereas if you wait, till rounds, I don't know, let's say 4 or 5, then maybe you have to get a guy like a Josh Jacobs or a David Montgomery. Those guys, while they're starters, they don't have nearly as much upside as these top tier running backs. So if I can, I tend to stick to the running back strategy.
Yeah, I definitely agree that I think that that's a good strategy. I think for me, it really just depends on where I fall. In past years, I've been very, very unlucky when it comes to getting in a top 5 draft position. I usually never get that, no matter what type of draft it is. So I've kind of adapted to go the strategy of best player available and then trying to get one of the top 2 tight ends, being Travis Kelce or Mark Andrews. So for me, after the first 3 or 4 running backs go, I don't really have a preference. I would much rather wait and go no running backs in the first 2 rounds than reach for a guy like a Nick Chubb or a DeAndre Swift. Just because, like I said, for my personal strategy, running backs get injured so often, I'm not sure if I want to commit a top 5 pick to someone who's not Jonathan Taylor or Derrick Henry. And even those guys get hurt after a while. So for me, it's definitely going to be best player available and then trying to get one of those top 2 tight ends because, like you said, with running backs, the tight end position goes away very quickly.
Yeah, I like the tight end strategy as well. That's one that really wasn't relevant for a long time. You normally wouldn't take a tight end that early, but Travis Kelce for a few years now, and now Mark Andrews really seems to be a guy that you have to take in one of those first 2 rounds if you want to get him. I'm in a league. It's a league I've been in for a bit, but they do 1.5 point PPR for the tight end, so they're a lot more valuable there. And I've seen people take Kelce go like first overall because he's just that valuable. And after those first 2 guys, you have such a positional advantage. Like no one's going to come close. Waller was there for a little bit, but he seems to have fallen down. But I do like the tight end strategy, and honestly, I have a decision to make if I'm keeping Kelce again this upcoming season. So let's get into our rankings here, Pat. We'll go top to bottom. So first, overall, this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. This seems to be the consensus everywhere, not just with us. I have him ranked 1. Pat has him ranked 1. He is our number 1 overall running back. It is Jonathan Taylor. So I don't think either of us really have to argue for taking him number one. And honestly, he'll likely go number one overall in just about every draft. So after just 2 years in the league, Jonathan Taylor got his number one overall running back fantasy finish. He got 21.95 PPR points per game. And there's really not much of it that has changed that would make it seem like that's going to decline. If anything, it's going to get better because you know who's not his quarterback anymore? Carson Wentz. So with Matty Ice coming in, who, you may say he's washed, that's completely fine, but he's not Carson Wentz. And look how well Cordero Patterson did last season with Matty Ice. He has no problem chucking the ball down to him. So if you're in any form of PPR, that is exciting. Now you can say, well, Nyheim Hines is going to be the passing back. Sure, but Jonathan Taylor showed that he can catch the ball. He had 40 receptions on 51 targets, a 78.4% catch rate. So honestly, he can catch the ball. They don't always have to go to Nyheim Hines. And Hines has also been known to get hurt. So if it is only JT in that backfield, that is amazing. And another thing I want to point out here is that Pro Football Focus just came out with their first lineup of offensive line rankings, and the Colts rank number 10. They are pretty good. Let's see here. They're one of the more veteran offensive lines, and they've stayed the same throughout the offseason. So they are still going to be able to make those holes to get Jonathan Taylor those touchdowns. I also think with Matt Ryan under center, there's going to be more scoring opportunities. So it's going to be exciting to see what he can do this season.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think my only concern is, as I stated earlier, all running backs have a risk of getting hurt. So that would be the only reason why any of these running backs we talk about would not ever go to the ranking that we assume that they deserve, which, like you said, he deserves to be number one based off of what he did last year. So for me, really, the Colts have a really good line. Like you said, Matt Ryan should be better. He should be an upgrade from Carson Wentz. And hopefully, wide receiver-wise, this will allow for Jonathan Taylor to have less pressure on him because we're hoping that Michael Pittman does better. And they drafted that kid from Cincinnati. I think his name is Pierce. So we're going to see how that plays out. But for me, Jonathan Taylor should be good to go because you have to remember they also played the Texans and the Jags twice this year because of their division. So there's at least 4 games that he should be an automatic start regardless of anything going on.
Coming in at our number 2 consensus ranking is Austin Eckler. I have him at 2. Pat, you have him at 3. Honestly, this is really based on PPR because that is the name of Austin Eckler's game. So if you're playing standard scoring, first off, change your scoring. Second off, this probably won't apply to you. Eckler is likely not number 2 in non-PPR scoring. So Eckler does not get a ton in rush attempts, but what he does get is a lot of targets, a lot of receptions. He got 17.25 touches a game, which is not a lot, but a quarter of those were from receptions, which are worth a lot more points. Last year, Eckler put up 70 receptions on 94 targets. This is a continuously improving offense. So in the past few years, they've been, like I said, continuously improving their offensive line. They have the same wide receivers they had last year, so that game's going to continue the same. So with this improved offensive line, Herbert is going to have more time to swing him the ball. And also, if he's rushing the ball, he can increase his 4.4 yards per carry and 1.25 touchdowns a game. There's also no competition for Austin Eckler, kind of like what we were talking about with JT. Seems to kind of only be Nyheim Hines for there. But Eckler was on the field for 65% of offensive snaps, with the next closest running back only on the field for 23% of offensive snaps. They did draft Isaiah Spiller, and sure, he's okay, but he doesn't have the draft capital or profile to be taking over a lot of work for Austin Eckler. Instead, what he's more likely to do is take work away from Josh Kelly. Something that always comes up as well with Austin Eckler is the risk for injury. He only missed a single game last year, and if it was any other season, that would have been a full season. So the name of Eckler's game is efficiency. He needs to catch the ball, and he needs to move the ball after he catches it. So in the standard league, again, likely not your number 2 guy. He's probably down pretty far, honestly. So Austin Eckler puts up 21.49 PPR points a game, which is just a little bit under what Jonathan Taylor is putting up. The other really neat fact about Austin Eckler, like I said, the name of his game is efficiency. He gets the most fantasy points per touch out of any running back. He gets 1.25 fantasy points per touch. And again, what that really sounds like is even if he just catches the ball, maybe he gets another 2.5 yards. That's 1.25. So he needs to be efficient in order for him to get his points. Otherwise, his workload is not as large as some of these other running backs, that it could get a little bit risky.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Isaiah Spiller because in the article I made a comment saying that everybody panicked when they got Josh Kelly because he was also a 4th-round pick, and they did absolutely nothing with him. So I agree that Spiller's not going to be a threat. And for me, the only reason I have him as the number 3 in power rankings is just because of the division that they play in.
Fair.
I'm a little concerned that just strength of schedule. Other than that, I think Austin Eckler's great. I would totally take him if he was available. And I'm trying to pull up and see if we can show exactly what the NFL strength of schedule is. And looking at his strength of schedule, for the most part, the actual season itself is fairly easy for the Chargers. But again, division-wise, you have to deal with the Raiders, you have to deal with the Broncos, and the Chiefs, which they should all have fairly good defenses this year. So that's sort of my concern for him. It's not like somebody who is my number 2, which we're going to be talking about next, who has a much, much easier time in his division.
Let's pause for a minute to talk about Anchor by Spotify. Anchor is an easy-to-use, one-stop shop to create and host your podcast. When we started making Sleeping with the Numbers, we used other hosts first that forced us to manually upload to Apple Music, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. But with Anchor, you simply upload to a single spot, and it distributes it automatically to all of these locations. But that isn't all. With Anchor, you can easily record, edit, and even add music directly from Spotify to your podcast to make it sound even better. So if you've been waiting around to create a podcast, wait no longer, because Anchor by Spotify makes it extremely easy to do. Anchor is completely free and can be used by downloading the mobile app on iOS or Android, or even right from their website, Anchor.fm. Make an account today and get podcasting. And coming in at number 3, Pat's number 2, my number 4 is Derrick Henry. And I want to preface this with, I am a massive Derrick Henry fan. I thought he should have been starting over DeMarco Murray way back when. They never let that happen. But I love Derrick Henry. Fantastic runner. Really fun to watch. Those stiff arms are magical. I can watch those compilations on YouTube every single day. I'll say there's 2 problems I have with Derrick Henry, and one really isn't that much of a problem, as I'll get to. Number 1, we finally saw that Derrick Henry is human. He's getting a bit older, and he finally had that injury, which, granted, wasn't the worst injury. He did come back at the end of the season, but didn't really get to pick up where he left off. So with that injury, that gives me a little bit of worry. I'm not saying I wouldn't draft him. It's just I would not take him as high as some others. So we did see that come down to earth for him with that injury. The other thing is he's at the age where the biggest drop in fantasy points per game for running backs occurs, going from age 28 to 29, which Henry turns this season. Again, I'm not a massive believer in age being a massive factor, especially with someone like Derrick Henry, but it does need to be brought up because the statistics say the wall is coming. The other thing is I think they are a much worse offense now after this offseason. They lose A.J. Brown. Yeah, they bring in Traylon Burks and Robert Woods. But that's not enough to keep the focus off of Henry. And again, maybe that really doesn't matter because Henry's shown he can kind of handle that focus. He touches the ball more than any other running back, more than any other player in the league. So where Austin Eckler's name of the game is efficiency, Henry's name of the game is massive workload. So he's going to touch the ball a ton, close to 30 times a game. The other good thing about Derrick Henry, much like Austin Eckler, there really is not a lot of competition. Most NFL teams now, they stick to the running back by committee system where, like Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb will play downs 1 and 2, but then they always bring in Kareem Hunt on down 3. That's not a thing at all with Derrick Henry. He's going to play all 3 downs, maybe even some fourth downs. But another really cool stat that I found here, Pat, there hasn't been a running back with 400-plus rush attempts since Larry Johnson in 2006. However, if Derrick Henry played all 17 games last season, he was on pace for 465 rush attempts, which would have easily broken that record. Even if it wasn't the longer season and we only played 16 games, he still would have crushed that current rush attempt record. So again, I don't think Henry's workload is going to diminish, but he is a bit more risky this upcoming season, which is why I have him at number 4.
Yeah, and like I said with Jonathan Taylor, any injury obviously changes my rankings, but what I'm going off of is what you just said earlier, is the volume. And I expect with losing A.J. Brown that volume hopefully goes a little bit more Derrick Henry. Obviously, he's not pass catching back, so he's not going to get targets from the backfield, but in terms of he has to take control of the offense. So I fully expect for that to occur. And I really like the fact that the AFC South outside the Colts stinks. So that's sort of the same logic I have with Jonathan Taylor. You have 4 guaranteed games where that person should do fairly well. And outside of that, I mean, I'm not really worried too much about Derrick Henry's age or anything until we actually see what happens. Players are going in the league longer now. So traditionally, like you said, this is usually the age where they start to drop off in production. But I'd like to see what actually happens because he did not play it like most of the season. Granted, it was from injury, but it's hard to tell if he would have had a 460-yard touch season, how his body would hold up this year.
Another really neat thing about Derrick Henry, he played less than half of the games this past season. He still finished as their running back 14. He beat Dalvin Cook, Josh Jacobs, Melvin Gordon, Javonte Williams, David Montgomery, DeAndre Swift. DeAndre Swift was also injured for a bit, but only 8 games, and he's still barely outside of the top 12. And speaking of Dalvin Cook, he is our consensus-ranked number 4 running back. I have him at 6. Pat, you have him at 4. Currently, among all active running backs who have 100 or more rush attempts, he is 4th in PPR points per game. Only 3 running backs ahead of him: Christian McCaffrey, Jonathan Taylor, and Alvin Kamara. And Kamara is the only one I personally do not have ranked ahead of Dalvin, and that's because I don't really know what's going to go on with the Saints here. But something that I believe you'll end up talking about, Pat, is Dalvin scored the lowest total touchdowns since his sophomore season last year. So it's easy to assume some positive regression should be coming for him. He was also down on a per-game basis, only scoring 0.46 touchdowns a game versus 0.92, which is his overall average. A question I kind of brought up to myself when writing my portion of this article on him is the rise of Justin Jefferson limiting Dalvin Cook's upside? Because much like Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson is very efficient. He can get the ball anywhere on the field and take it to the house, which then means Cook isn't getting his 10-zone, red zone, 1-yard line touches. So his touchdown amount may be going down, but I think that changes this year. I think his touchdowns go back up. Just a little interesting thing that I noticed since the addition of Justin Jefferson, his total touchdowns and opportunities has decreased. However, I'm still a fan of Dalvin Cook. I don't really like the Vikings as a whole, but I think they're great for fantasy.
Yeah, I agree that Justin Jefferson's probably poaching some targets and some touchdown opportunities from Dalvin. So you're more than likely right that he's the main reason why he only had 6 touchdowns last year. For me, I'm kind of hoping that that was a fluke in a sense. It seemed like the Vikings have always played below their potential. So I'm really banking on the fact that the Vikings kind of kick it into gear and he goes back to being as productive as he can because he's still top 5 for goal line carries and touches per game. So
Yeah.
he should have had a better season. Not really sure what happened. And also, we forgot about Adam Thielen. He had, what, over 8 receiving touchdowns, and he had some random end zone scores that he didn't necessarily deserve. So for me, I think with Dalvin Cook, if he continues to get that workload, I think he's going to end the season better than what he did. And at worst, even though he's number 4, I like his potential over some of the other guys that we have coming up because I think for the Vikings, this is a year where they can potentially fight for the number 1 spot in the NFC North.
Yeah.
Now that Devontae Adams is gone, doesn't mean they're going to do it, but we're hoping that they do. They did shore up their defense a little bit, so it may be less playing from behind, and you may not see Kirk Cousins throw for 500 yards or whatever he was doing last year.
The other thing I want to bring up is that they have a new head coach. Mike Zimmer is out, which brings in Kevin O'Connell. So I'm curious what he ends up doing with the running game because Dalvin Cook has a fantastic backup with Alexander Madison. So unlike the other guys, we could end up seeing more of a committee type workload here if that ends up happening. Coming in at consensus 5, I have him at 5. Pat, you have him at 6. Our hometown boy, Najee Harris. I have his jersey ready to go. Whoop. Drop my mic. I got excited.
You can't drop the mic just yet. We have not finished the episode.
Apologies. It didn't hit the ground. It's okay. But I got my Najee Harris jersey. I'm excited. He's my current favorite player in the league. So, again, trying to get my bias out of this. But Najee is going to be yet again a necessity for the Steelers. He was a necessity when Ben was out there because our offensive line could not block. So Ben had to get the ball out quickly, and Juju wasn't there, so he got the short passes out to Najee Harris. Najee also was on the field more than any other running back last season. He played 84% of all offensive snaps. The next closest was Alvin Kamara at 75%. So he's on the field. Like I said, he is a necessity. And I think it's going to be the same way this season with Pickett or Trubisky. Whoever that quarterback is, they're going to need a safety valve. And that safety valve is going to be Najee. Our offensive line has not improved. It honestly may have gotten worse. Pro Football Focus currently has them ranked 30 out of 32 for offensive lines. So not excited for that. And you can see how poorly our offensive line impacts him because he's really good at catching. That's where he got a lot of his points. He got the most receptions out of any running back, including Austin Eckler, who we have, well, I have at 2, Pat has at 3. And he gets 6.3 yards per reception. Again, the downfall comes with the rushing. Najee was only able to put up 3.9 yards per attempt, which is 38th out of all active running backs. And to kind of put that in perspective, Ronald Jones and Devonta Freeman had more yards per attempt than Najee Harris. And I don't think we would consider either of those guys elite running backs, but we would consider Najee Harris an elite running back. But this is what a good or even an average run blocking offensive line can do for those mediocre running backs. We are so far below average. We are the 3rd worst in offensive line. We're bad at run blocking. We're bad at pass blocking. But either way, Najee is kind of like Derrick Henry with passing ability. He is able to get a large workload because we have to give that to him. He also got big this season. He is now 244 pounds. So he is a massive, massive man. And I'm still excited to watch him work, but I do fear for his total output because I think the Steelers, at least on the offensive line, have taken a step back.
Yeah, I think that, his sub 4 yards per carry was due to the fact that he was not being blocked by anybody. And in all honesty, I agree with you that Najee has the volume that we've talked about with Derrick Henry and Dalvin Cook. So I do think he has potential to get there. And whenever Kenny Pickett is the starting quarterback, because that's who it will be, calling it now, I'm not really sure what to expect. So that's why I didn't have Najee higher than Cook in this situation, because I probably would have put him above Dalvin Cook had I known that he was going to get the same type of volume as he did last year. My main concern is that he could not get in the red zone, but neither could anybody else on the Steelers.
Yeah.
So it's too much of a question mark, like you said, with the offensive line and how the offense is going to look entirely, that I'm not really sure what's going to happen. So I think volume base is going to be top 5 mainly, especially if he just catches out the backfield like he did last year. He should get enough points to be relevant, but is he going to go into that elite status this year? I don't know. We'll have to wait. So that's why I didn't put him any higher than 5.
Yeah, and I think that's completely fair. I think 5 is a good spot for him, and I would be completely excited to get him that late. He's kind of at the end of that top tier of running backs that I'm kind of looking for in the first round, because I think he's still a first round guy, but maybe mid or later first round. Next guy here, Pat, tied for 6. We actually have 3 players tied for 6 in our consensus rankings, just because that's how the math worked out. But this is our biggest gap. So we seem to disagree here. I have him at 3. Pat, you have him at 11. We are 8 spots apart. So I'm going to have you defend yourself here. Why don't you like the number 1 overall running back in points per game, Christian McCaffrey?
I'm sorry, were you questioning my ranking of Christian McCaffrey? Because I think that I very well stated it in the article where I had a discussion between myself and a fictional person titled Everyone, asking me why I did that, because Christian McCaffrey is the best running back ever. But he's only played 10 total games in the past 2 seasons and scored 2 touchdowns in 7 games last year. And then in reality, we know that when he does play, he finishes in top 5 as a running back per game, which is pretty great. That's a guy that you would happily take with the first overall pick, right? And I compared him to Saquon Barkley, since Barkley and him both came into the league. Now, McCaffrey has an extra year, but in reality, with them both having injuries, it doesn't really matter, right? Rushing skills, Saquon Barkley has 5 extra yards per game on an extra attempt and a half. So that's about even, right? Touchdown ratio for rushing is about a half a touchdown per game, so about the same. Receiving is where it gets weird because they're almost identical in a sense where Barkley only gets 4 receptions, McCaffrey gets 6. But they're both about 9 yards per reception. So my entire point is that we've used Christian McCaffrey as this elite running back, but in reality, he has not really produced the past 2 years in anything different than Saquon Barkley, a guy that everybody hates. So my question is, why are we power ranking him higher than anybody else when 2019 was the only year he got more than double-digit touchdowns in rushing?
Yeah.
So I guess for me, I think Christian McCaffrey has the talent to be elite, and unlike a Derrick Henry who came back last season and showed that he can handle it, I mean, my concern with McCaffrey is that the Panthers are just so bad it doesn't matter.
Yeah, those are all completely fair arguments. It's interesting. And I think the big thing is just how well he does on a per-game basis. And it's very difficult to keep injury bias out of rankings and stuff because, like you said, he's only played 10 10 games in the past 2 seasons, which is really, really, really bad. If you're in maybe a best ball league, I think that's okay to draft him because you don't have to worry about starting him or not. If he gets the most points for you, he gets up in that lineup. But if he, breaks his leg on the field, you don't have to worry about not putting him in your lineup because it will automatically do that for you. Now, however, I would imagine the vast majority of leagues are not best ball leagues. So he's was so difficult for me to rank. Pat, have you had him on your team at all on any year?
I don't believe so.
Okay. I have not either. So I haven't experienced that pain of losing him after only a few games and most likely drafting him 1 overall. I did just, like I said, I had a dynasty startup and I did draft him. But because it was best ball, I felt more comfortable doing it. I was also able to get him pretty late. I got him at the 108, where in current ADP in PPR scoring, he's going 3rd overall. The only 2 going ahead of him currently are Jonathan Taylor and Austin Eckler. So still 3rd off the board, which quite honestly does seem high for me, and maybe I do have to adjust my rankings. But if I'm able to take that shot on a guy who is going to get me 22.47 points per game, I think I have to do it unless there's a really good alternative. So the other thing is he's going to get the work because, like you said, Pat, the Panthers suck. They don't know what they need to do as a team, especially if Sam Darnold is still going to be their quarterback, even more so if Baker ends up being their quarterback, which I just read an article saying that they're desperately trying to get Baker, which makes me cringe. But Matt Rule knows that I think he might be nearing to end of his head coaching life. He has not performed at all, and you can blame it on injury, you can blame it on him not having a team, but the fact is a head coach should be able to do something, and he has not. So I think a way for him to kind of escape the noose of him losing his job is to get the ball into the hands of his best player, which will be Christian McCaffrey. Next guy we hear, again, tied for 6 in our consensus, is Joe Mixon. I have him at 9. Pat, you have him at 5. I don't have a ton bad to say about Joe Mixon. Now, that's on the field. Off the field, he's a horrible, horrible human being. Look up the videos. But the fact is, he gets work. He gets the work. But he only played his first 16-game season last year. And if it wasn't our first 17-game season, he would have had his first full, complete season. So, when we talk injuries, Joe Mixon needs to be brought up because I did have him the one season where they couldn't decide if he was coming back or not. I think it was an ankle injury. They're like, oh, yeah, he's coming back next week. And they kept putting it off. And then, with 4 weeks to go in the season or something, they put him on IR. Just really, really screwed with the fantasy owner there, which horribly annoying. Luckily, I was able to trade him. But he's on a fantastic offense. I would say top 5 offense in the league. He only gets currently 15.12 PPR points per game. That's not anything great. But over the past 3 years, he's been increasing that number. 14.09, 16.6, 17.99. That big jump from 14.09 to 16.6 was when Joe Burrow joined the team. So they are a much better team. Obviously, they made it to the Super Bowl. But being on a good team is really important for a running back. Pretty much almost as important as having a good offensive line. The other thing that helps Mixon out is Zach Taylor likes to grind out the clock when they're winning the game, which means Joe gets to run out the clock because they're going to hand him the ball, keep that clock running. So where he may not have as many spiky ceiling type games, he feels like a safe play to me, Pat.
So with Joe Mixon, I agree with you that the Bengals should continue to be good this year. and there's not really anybody behind him that should poach any production. So for me, I don't even really have to talk too much about Joe Mixon either. He was a top five running back, and he get the third most goal line carries, which, as we saw with guys like James Conner, that's huge. That's what really defines whether or not you have a good fantasy season, is if you can get the ball in the end zone. So I feel that this year should be another solid year for Joe Mixon. Maybe he doesn't finish top five again, but he's definitely going to be at least in the top 10. And we know that defensively speaking, the AFC North is good, but who knows how elite it's going to be. We've seen a lot of bend and break defense from the Steelers. We've seen the Ravens kind of go all over the place, and who knows what the Browns are going to be like this year. So Joe Mixon may have a pretty solid season under the radar again. You should be able to get good value for him.
Finished as the running back 12 last season, which, again, I think that's okay. I think that's kind of what you expect, just a steady season for Joe Mixon. But if they're able to kind of keep scoring, and this is somewhat of a similar issue that Dalvin Cook has, right? He has a young, very talented wide receiver that can take the ball to the house from anywhere on the field, which can kind of put a cap on his touchdown ability. Also tied for 6 is DeAndre Swift. Pat and I both have him at 7. To me, Swift feels like a Christian McCaffrey light. And by that, I mean he is a very necessary weapon on a bad team. Even though I think the Lions are better than the Panthers right now. Do you agree?
It's close. I'm willing to give the Lions the advantage because I think that they have the potential to be better.
Yeah. Yeah, so maybe that's it. The Lions' arrow's pointing up. The Panthers are pointing down. Again, especially if they bring on Baker. So Swift, like I said, like Christian McCaffrey light, necessary weapon, bad team. He's also very similar to Austin Eckler, because a lot of his points are going to be done through the passing game. So again, if you're playing standard, change your scoring settings. But also, he's likely not this high on your list for a standard league. Swift is getting 4.15 receptions per game, and on top of that, he gets about 7.5 yards per reception. So not only is he catching the ball, he's getting a lot of yards after the catch. However, being on a poopy team like the Lions is going to cap his touchdown ability and therefore his ceiling. They also add an actual wide receiver, Jameson Williams, and that's going to give some competition for targets. I'm excited for Swift. I actually got him on both of my dynasty leagues, and that's where I like him most, is in a dynasty setting, because I think he's going to continue to improve going forward. But for redraft, I am a little lower on him, hence the 7 overall ranking.
Yeah, I think he's yet another, and I guess before I even start talking, the theme for most of these running backs in our top 10 is volume.
Yeah.
I think that we can both agree with that, because until he got hurt, he was the number one receiving running back. And even Williams, for whenever he was playing for the Lions, he had a fairly good season because of that. So I'm not concerned that the Lions drafted receivers or brought in anybody this year, because I think that overall it should balance itself out pretty well and actually might help DeAndre Swift. And something that I found that was interesting is if you compare him to Najee Harris, which granted Najee Harris played a lot more this year, DeAndre Swift had very similar receiving stats. Even in his less games, he had about the same yardage and one less touchdown. Now, rushing was where it was a lot different, but he had rushing touchdowns. He only had 2 less. He had 5, and Najee Harris had 7. So it shows that DeAndre Swift is efficient when he does play. So therefore, my theory is that as long as he can stay healthy, he should easily compete for a top 5 spot, given the amount of volume that he'll get.
Consensus ranked number 9, Alvin Kamara, and this was surprising to me. You know, after kind of ranking all the rest of these guys, seeing Kamara this low is kind of telling. So I have him at 8. Pat, you have him at 10. Kamara has put up 21.04 PPR points per game over his career, which is second best out of all active running backs. Only Christian McCaffrey above him on a per game basis. The problem is, a lot of those stats are padded by the time he spent with Drew Brees, including 4 massive games where he was getting over 40 points. In his first season without Brees, Kamara dropped to just 18.05 points per game, about 3 points less per game than he was averaging. Now, I think the whole world kind of saw Kamara's opportunities on the field going down once Brees left, but we didn't really know how much, and it was a bit dramatic. So Kamara only got 9 touchdowns after putting up 21 touchdowns in the previous season. There was also worries about his receptions decreasing as well. So last season, he only had 47 receptions, 3.62 per game. This is down about 2 full receptions from that previous season. Again, his final season with Drew Brees. But I wanted to dig into that a little bit more because he was splitting time between Taysom Hill as his quarterback and Jameis Winston. And when I kind of looked into it, it was really when Taysom was under center that Kamara was not getting targeted. This is, of course, because Taysom's a ball hog and just wants to run around at all times when he's under pressure rather than dumping it off to Kamara, which is usually the better play. So out of Kamara's 67 targets last season, only 17 of them were from Taysom. However, this upcoming season, Taysom is fully committed to being a tight end for whatever reason after getting a big payday. Again, something weird was going on with Taysom and Sean Payton. I don't know why he was given all these opportunities and paid that much. But either way, he's the tight end now, meaning Jameis is going to be the starting quarterback. And a lot of people, when you think of Jameis Winston, he's like, he's the typical chuck the ball down the field type quarterback. However, Kamara, 55% of the Kamara's receptions came from Jameis Winston. Again, when comparing it to what he was getting from Drew Brees, is pretty much nothing. But still, it is important to note that at least Jameis was giving Kamara a chance in the passing game. Now, it's possible Michael Thomas is returning this season, which I don't really care about. I think he's kind of over the hill now. He peaked, but they also traded up like 8 times or whatever it was in order to draft Chris Olave. So that is where my worry is. With Chris Olave coming in, Jameis might end up having a new buddy, and he might end up chucking the ball to him a lot more than giving it to Kamara. We also get to see what new head coach Dennis Allen looks to do. So I was curious what type of coach he is, if he likes to run the ball, pass the ball, whatever. And I look back at when he was the head coach of the Raiders, back with Darren McFadden and Marcel Reese. They were targeted a lot. And Carson Palmer was the quarterback at that time, so it could have just been an older quarterback type thing, kind of like Phillip Rivers, how he always chucked the ball to the running back. But it's nice to see that Allen will allow his running backs to catch the ball. So I think Kamara has upside, but I am scared to take him because I don't know what the New Orleans Saints are this season.
Yeah, I think my concern with Kamara is, like you said, we don't know what's going to go on whenever James Winston's full-time quarterback, because I found out that whenever Kamara and Winston were together, he was in the top 10 at a minimum for fantasy running backs, and he got a quarter of the target share. Now, who's to say that that's going to continue, especially now that they brought in Jarvis Landry and Chris Olave? So he had a weird situation where his rushing attempts increased dramatically, and I think that was because they didn't trust the quarterback in St. Louis, in New Orleans, and I'm not really sure if that's going to continue. And Jameis also had a weird season last year, too, because he went away from this deep gunslinger type of quarterback to super efficient. Yeah. So until we see further notice, Alvin Kamara, he's kind of in an odd situation where he could be real good, but I think you and I are both really confused on what's going to happen, and I think that's why he's ranked so low.
Yeah, you need to get him for the right price. Otherwise, if you draft him too early, he could burn you. Because let's take a look at his average draft position right now. He's currently going 13th off the board overall, and he's going as the one, two, three, four, seventh running back off the board. So again, bit risky there, but there's definitely upside if they keep him involved. We have two guys tied for 10th overall in our consensus rankings. I have him at 10. Pat, you have him at 9. Aaron Jones, the only remaining Green Bay Packer, it feels like. So it's the Aaron show. It's Aaron Rodgers and Aaron Jones. I really have a tough time seeing how Aaron Jones has a bad season. The only thing I can think of is injury, because I don't think A.J. Dillon's going to come in and completely take this role, especially in the passing game. So Aaron Jones, like I said, the only remaining guy left, and shout out to the fantasy footballers, they have pointed out that whenever a wide receiver or the wide receiver one leaves for a team, a lot of the time, the majority of those targets go to the running back position. And Aaron Jones is already known for catching the ball out of the backfield. So I expect him to have a pretty good season. I have him here at 10. And that's only because I think I enjoy pretty much everyone else that I've listed more than him. Obviously, hence the ranking. But there's potential there for Aaron Jones to have a top 5 season. I think the reason I have him down here at number 10 is because those range of outcomes are a bit more. So it's kind of similar to the New Orleans situation where I don't know what type of team Green Bay is going to be without Devontae Adams, without MVS. It's really going to be fun and interesting to see because they can go downhill, but that could also mean Aaron Jones just gets a lot of work. And we already talked about how important volume is for a running back. So if he's able to get the workload, Aaron Jones has top 5 potential, like I said.
Yeah, I agree with you as well. He's kind of in the same situation as Alvin Kamara, where we just don't really know what's going to happen. Now, we know that Aaron Rodgers is a great quarterback, but we don't really know how the offense is going to look now that Devontae Adams is gone. And for me, he only had 800 rushing yards last year and 4 rushing touchdowns, so I'm hoping, like Dalvin Cook, that was kind of a fluke because the Packers, for whatever reason, were just kind of in a weird situation. So he's gotten at least 60 targets over the past 3 seasons, so I expect him to at least get 70 now that Devontae's gone. So I agree with you. He has potential to do well. It's just more of, can he actually get there, and will the Packers utilize him the way that they could, or is it going to go into a more balanced offense now that Devontae's gone?
Kind of a similar situation here for this next guy, Pat. So James Conner, again, tied here for 10th with Aaron Jones. I have him at 11. You have him at 8. They also lost their wide receiver 1 for different reasons. PED use for DeAndre Hopkins. So he's going to be gone 6 games. That could give opportunity to James Conner to catch some more balls. Now, remember, no more Chase Edmonds here, who was getting a lot of that passing work. So James Conner can soak up some of those targets. I did, in a previous article, call his massive touchdown season last year a fluke, and I still believe that. And that is because they just had a lot of goal line opportunities for him where you could hand the ball to anyone, and it's a 50-50 shot that they're going to get it in. I don't think that's so much on James Conner himself. However, Chase Edmonds gone. Volume's important. I think he does get a decent amount of work. Is he going to be efficient with that work? That remains to be seen. But as long as he continues to get the ball and they're really not looking to give it off to another guy, I think he sticks here as a running back 1. I'm not super excited for him, but I think his floor is a high RB2. I just don't see a ceiling for him, Pat. Do you?
I don't. I'm not really sure what could happen because, as I mentioned, with Chase Edmonds gone, we kind of thought that was going to be a big deal. But then I looked at he actually did very well in the passing game. I think Chase Edmonds was seen as the passing option out of the backwood. Did you know James Conner caught 95% of the passes thrown his way, which they
Got
should have been
names.
easy passes to catch, but that's pretty good.
Yeah.
That gives me confidence. And the stats that he got last year are very similar to what he did in Pittsburgh in 2018. So I don't see it as a fluke. I see it as somebody finally gave him an opportunity to succeed. So, as you said, there's no reason to believe that he should have a worse season this year. The only way that that's going to happen is if the Cardinals end up sucking somehow, which they won't.
Yeah, I think the name of the game, again, is just going to be he'll be consistent, I think. He's going to get opportunities. The problem is, again, they also do not have a great offensive line. Currently 25th out of 32, according to Pro Football Focus. Pro Football Focus. So that's a little worrisome there. But the Cardinals are such a fast-paced offense, and no DeAndre Hopkins. Connor's going to need to be used. And our final guy here coming in at number 12 is Nick Chubb. I have him at 12. Pat has him at 13. There's not, again, there's really not a ton to say here. I think the upside is limited for Nick Chubb because, as we kind of discussed before, they are the prime example of a committee backfield. Nick Chubb's going to get first down, second down work, then they're going to bring in Kareem Hunt. It is always going to be that way. Now, quarterback situation is confusing as hell, too. We don't know who the starting quarterback's going to be. It sounds like the Panthers are really digging and driving trying to get Baker, and it's like a game of chicken. Are they going to trade for him, or are they going to try to wait out the Browns to drop him? And the other thing is, it sounds like the Browns don't want to drop him because they don't know what the hell is going to happen with Watson. And I still fully expect him to be suspended at the start of the season. But if they do that and drop or trade Baker, I don't even know who the next guy up is. I don't know why I want to say Case Keenum. I don't think that's true. Let me just do a little Googling real quick. We go to, no, why did it take me to Arizona? I want to see Cleveland. Quarterback. Jacoby Brissett. And Josh Dobbs. I forgot about him too. So if Watson isn't there and Baker's gone, Jacoby Brissett will be the starting quarterback for the Cleveland Browns. And I don't think Jacoby's really known for passing the ball. Not that really Chubb catches passes, but that's the other thing we need to talk about here. Is these are based off of half PPR point scoring. And Chubb isn't the pass catcher. It's Kareem Hunt. So that's why he's very limited here. Other than that, he's probably the second best pure runner in the league behind Derrick Henry. So, again, he'll have his opportunities here, but upside is limited by, by quarterback, poor offense, so less scoring opportunities, and then he doesn't catch passes.
Yeah, I agree with all those issues, and we still have no idea what's going to happen with his usage versus Kareem Hunt and Dearness Johnson. So, for me, he only had 100 rushing yards last year, one time.
Oof.
That's kind of concerning because that was what he was good at.
Yeah.
We knew that whenever he was a solid top 5 fantasy pick, it was over 100 yards, 2 to 3 touchdowns, and he wasn't doing that last year. So I think the problem is that Nick Chubb's on the out in terms of being an elite running back. So if Deshaun Watson doesn't play, he might have some better opportunities. But I also know that last year, whenever Baker was hurt, I think everybody realized that they were just going to run the ball.
Right.
And it didn't work out for them very well. So I foresee that again if we find out that Baker's gone and, like you said, it's Jacoby Brissett or whatever.
I think he's also going to have a hard time because, as we discussed earlier, the AFC North defenses are pretty damn good. The Steelers are currently ranked 4th for defensive line. I believe.
Is that before just Stephon Tuitt retired, though?
That is after.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it says even with Stephon Tuitt's retirement, they're still pretty good. I also Cincinnati's at 14 and Baltimore is at 18. I'm a little surprised with the Baltimore one. I think Baltimore's defensive line is going to be better than expected. But either way, I think they're going to be pretty good at stopping that run. And they just know the team so well. And they know they're going to likely want to hand the ball off to Chubb if Watson isn't there. Because that's what they're good at. They are a very good running team. But you can't do it all the time.
Right.
So, Pat, let's each pick a guy here that didn't make it into the consensus top 12, but you are still excited about for this season.
Well, for me, it's probably going to be random, but it's someone that always helped me in fantasy, and I have a feeling that he's going to do it again because it's just the way that the Jaguars work, and it's going to be James Robinson because everyone's kind of banking that Travis Etienne's going to be this number one guaranteed starter. How do we know that? And I'm being serious. Like, I don't understand why he's being touted as the number one running back already because whenever James Robinson played last year, he did very good. And just to kind of give you some ideas, whenever he carried the ball, because there were games where he only got like one or two touches, he ended up being 11th in yards after contact and 8th in red zone touchdowns. So I think James Robinson's a guy where I know that we're trying to see who should be like honorable mentions, but I think this is the guy you should still draft, hoping that the Eagles, I was going to say the Eagles because of Doug Peterson, the Jaguars are going to have a multi-back committee, and James Robinson still might get some goal line work because we have no idea what Travis Etienne is going to be. I don't know if you agree with that or not, but whenever Doug Peterson was the coach for the Eagles, we did see that.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And currently, according to our lads, James Robinson is listed as the running back one for the Jaguars. So it will be interesting to see. I know Peterson likes to kind of rotate these guys, so it might be similar to a Cleveland situation where James Robinson is going to be the early down back, and they bring in ETN as a change of pace guy, which makes sense to me. The other question there, they draft Snoop Connor, I think in the 5th round, so he shouldn't be too big of a threat. But the fact that they added someone is it brings question to me. It might have just been a depth play. But I agree. I like James Robinson a lot. I think they're just excited to get ETN on the field after his missed rookie year. Does that count? He was on the IR, so that counts as an accrued season. So he is technically not a rookie anymore, but we should think of this as his rookie season. For me, I am excited for J.K. Dobbins, which is weird for me to say that I'm excited about a Baltimore Raven, because that usually doesn't happen. But J.K. Dobbins, in the year that he played, he had 15 games played. He was getting 6.7 yards per reception and 6 yards per rush attempt. So he was very efficient. And I think most of that is going to be attributed to the Baltimore Ravens being really good at being a run-first team. However, he gets limited because Lamar is always going to be their running back one. But with the loss of Hollywood, I think there's going to be a lot more opportunity for the run game because you can't always just throw the ball to Mark Andrews, which is what Lamar likes to do when he throws the ball. I don't think Rashard Bateman is really going to be the one to pick up the slack here. I think they are really just going to stick to their guns and run the ball. So Dobbins, obviously there's worry here because of his injuries and everything. But when he did play, he was pretty efficient. He put up 9 touchdowns in the season. Not terrible for, I believe that was his rookie season as well. So again, not terrible, but he is someone you can get pretty late. And if I look him up here, Dobbins, he's going 37th overall as the running back 20. So people are drafting him as like a low-end running back 2. But I think he has, maybe a high-end RB2, low-end RB1 upside. Just because, again, the Ravens want to run the ball. That is their game plan from the very beginning. And they don't stray away from it. Even when they are losing, they are going to continue to run the ball. That's what they like to do. I also think the Ravens have a pretty solid offense, and there's going to be some scoring opportunities for them. The other stat that I brought up was his yards per reception. Doesn't get a ton. He only got 18 receptions, but the work he did with it was pretty solid. He also got 4 receiving touchdowns. So 13 total touchdowns the season he played. I understand the worry and everything, but it's similar to James Robinson. You take these guys late and you see what happens. That'll do it for this episode. Thanks for giving it a listen, and check out the article accompanying. Jeez. Wow, why is that so difficult for me to say? Either way, there's an article that goes paired with this episode. If you want some more details and statistics about the players we just talked about, that will be released on Medium on our publication called The Sports Dream. And if you'd like to write for The Sports Dream, if you ever thought about writing sports articles, let us know. You can submit directly to the publication. You can message us if you want on Twitter or email us. However you want to get in contact with us, you can do that. But you don't need to. You can write your article on Medium and submit it to our publication. I'll give it a review, and then we decide whether or not we post it. It does not have to be about football. Pat wrote an article about betting on soccer. So any type of sport you want, we'd love to have you as a writer. The bar is low. We're not great writers by any means. But if you want to take a shot on that, please give it a try. We also have a game out on iOS currently and coming to Android soon, hopefully today. It is called Fumble. It is a fantasy football player guessing game. Essentially what you do is you guess a fantasy football player. It will give you some stats about them according to their fantasy points for the 2021 season, their fantasy finish, etc. From there, you keep guessing until you get the player correct. It's pretty fun. It's pretty similar to Wordle or even Weddle if you played that. It's pretty much the NFL Wordle. But you can give it a go. Available now on iOS and coming soon to Android. You can also do some prop betting, as we always say, with Monkey Knife Fight. Check out our link in the description and get your first deposit match instantly up to $100. We're going to have football here in 2 months, so if you just want to set aside some money and get it matched instantly, go ahead and put it there for safekeeping, and you can use it to bet on prop bets once the NFL season starts. But you don't have to wait for the NFL season to start. Basketball's going on. The hockey Stanley Cup Finals are going on. League of Legends. They have so many different sports that you can do prop bets for. Check it out, monkeyknifefight.com. Use our link in the description.
And last but not least, it's finally my turn to talk. You can go to BarkBox and get something for your dog. If you realize that you're terrible at sports betting or writing or anything like that, at least you will make your dog happy. You can get a subscription box, and it will deliver treats and toys directly to your door. They make boxes for all different shapes and sizes, and they even have different themes. So you can check out our link and get a discount. I believe it is still a free month. If not, you might be able to add an extra special toy to your box. It all depends on what you want. BarkBox is highly customizable, and I've used it on my dog for a while now. So go ahead and click our link and check it out.
Thanks, we'll see you next time.